Welcome back to Walker Talks Live on Walker Talks Radio. It's been a minute, Chuck. We've been on the beach. We've been getting tan. You've been wearing a Speedo.
That is
God knows
fair.
why.
We weren't on the beach together with me wearing a Speedo. It's very important. You vacation in the weirdest spot I've ever heard anyone vacation. Although the pictures look cool. I vacation in the Redneck Riviera. You go back home to where all the liberals eventually go once a year. I'm assuming for mating purposes. You go to the Northeast.
Well, technically, let me correct you. Delaware is the Mid-Atlantic. We are actually on the same latitude line as D.C. It's not the Northeast.
That's only for college basketball. That's the only time the Mid-Atlantic is a thing. That is the Northeast.
All right, let me ask you this. You were in Alabama, and you wore a Speedo. Like, give me some context around this. Like, you just didn't, like, this has got to be a story.
Yeah, all right. So a few years ago, my wife and I were in Puerto Vallarta. And this is unusual, had too many drinks. And we had met this person who had worked there, and he like carried us around to different places. Because when I go somewhere, I'm like, hey, where do the locals go? Like, we made friends with this guy. And anyway, we were like, it wasn't downtown Puerto Vallarta, but it was like where some shops and stuff were. And I walked into this place, and I was like, Fernando, pick out a shirt. So he picked out a shirt, and I bought it for him, just being nice. And there was a Speedo. And I was like, hell, I was like, this would be funny as hell. So I bought the Speedo. I certainly couldn't wear it at the resort that we were staying at. But a few years later at Gulf Shores, I pulled it out. And like I let all the kids and my wife and everybody go down to the beach first. Now my wife knew I was going to do
it. Speedo, right? You pulled out the Speedo.
Yes. Yeah. I pulled it out. I put it on. And I waddled down to the beach, much to their shock and horror, as well as other beachgoers' shock and horror a few years ago. So now it's like an annual thing. When we go to the beach with the kids, I'll pull it back out.
Yes, the Speedo. Like, let's be clear on what it is. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's a Speedo. Lots of things are pulled out.
They are. I need you to get me one next time you go down there.
Well, we went to Puerto Vallarta during COVID. I have since learned I can unless there is a global pandemic, I cannot afford to go to Puerto Vallarta. We went like 2 times in a year. It was amazing.
Well, of course, because you know what? For all the people out there sharing those dumbass memes about November 5th, 2020, when gas prices and travel prices were so low, it's because we were in a fucking pandemic.
Okay,
it didn't have anything to do with the president.
Before the pandemic, gas prices were lower before the pandemic. Again, you were not this riddled with angst before you went to the Northeast.
Oh my God, stop. All right. Let's get serious for the next 40 to 45 minutes. And we're going to talk about something that's happening locally in our town in West Tennessee. And then we're going to connect it to a broader topic of conversation because the Supreme Court they ruled on a lot of things, right?
I've often wondered, what the hell do these guys get paid for? They've been very busy as of late.
Well, it seems like they get paid to just, basically vote along partisan lines, which is not at all what the Supreme Court is supposed to do, but that's just what it's turned into.
Was it Lady Justice with the scales and the blindfold? That's horseshit, isn't it?
It is. She might as well be wearing a fucking blue robe with an elephant on it right now. Because, that's what we have. Right? Because this immunity shit, and then what we're going to talk about tonight with the public camping. All right, but we're going to start local first, right? What's happening in Jackson, Tennessee? And what we've been trying to do in our city for like the last 3 years is to build a homeless shelter for men because someone literally died, right? Because they didn't have shelter.
Which happens in all types of communities, during really bad weather, really, really hot. Well, we always think cold weather, and that makes a ton of sense, but it happens in hot weather too.
Mm-hmm. By the way,
with homeless people.
When that happened 4 years ago, my first inclination was, well, why didn't that man just go to the homeless shelter? Because I was under the impression, or I should say I assumed, and you know what they say about assuming, I assumed that we had a men's homeless shelter in Jackson. I just assumed that. I don't know why I assumed it, but I did. Did you? Did you assume that?
I did. I'm going to tell you why. And our community that you and I live in is not unique. This plays out all across the nation. There are I looked it up right before we went on. There are over 11,000 homeless shelters, and this is 2022 data, 11,000 homeless shelters in the United States, right? So that's quite a bit. a large portion of those. So when I think homeless or unhoused is the correct word to use now, Gabe, and I appreciate you using
What?
it for
Wait,
that.
you're. Look at you,
I've just
Chuck.
been waiting for years to do that. But regardless, so if you are unhoused, you would think that's for anybody. What we have here and what you see in a lot of communities are shelters for women and even more specifically, women and children. You would think, okay, we're leaving an abusive home and we need somewhere to, we don't know where to turn, right? Those shelters are in lots and lots of communities throughout the United States. Here's what threw me, and I didn't realize this until we dealt with this in our town. But I kind of looked this up. This is this way all throughout that 11,000 number. A lot of these figures are for women and children. Not all of them are for men. I figured you would have a shelter would take anybody who was unhoused, right? That would be now. Obviously, you would have them separated. Like I figured there were some rules and things like that, but I never thought about it enough to think, okay, this would not necessarily be for everybody. But a lot of the shelters, and I don't know the percentage, but it's a few thousand of that 11,000. It's not quite half, but a few thousand of that 11,000 are specifically just for women and children.
Yeah.
So that 11,000 number is probably closer to 6,500, something like that.
See, I don't even think when you say 11,000 shelters, that doesn't even sound like that many to me for as big of a
Well,
country.
there's only 50 states.
What's that?
There's only 50 states. It's 2,000 shelters a state.
Yeah, that's true.
Or no,
That's true.
200 shelters a state. Sorry.
So where we are here is now we've run into a roadblock, right? For 3 years of planning, and all of a sudden in the last like 6 weeks, people are like, wait a second, why are we building this? How's this going to affect business downtown? And like, how's this going to affect the budget? And they had 3 years to sort of bitch about it, but they're waiting until right now to do that. You and I went to the city council meeting today. It seems like they're going to move forward with this. They're going to figure out how to work it into the budget. That's a whole different topic of conversation. But the homeless issue, and I believe, especially given the way the economy is trending and has been since inflation really hit hard after all that COVID money was dispersed by both presidents, by the way.
The Biden presidency is what you're referring to, yes.
With both, yes, Trump and Biden. Both of them pumped a lot of money into this economy. I'm not saying that it wasn't necessary. I think it probably was for some people. I think other people took advantage of it. And anyway, once you have a free flow of money into an economy the way we did, you're going to have inflation. This is where we are. I think the homeless population is only going to go up in the next few years. So the Supreme Court ruled 4 days ago that local authorities can prosecute people for public camping. Now, I don't know if you remember in Tennessee, this was an issue that the Tennessee state legislature, I believed, either tried to pass or did pass a year ago in session. Do you remember that coming up in Tennessee?
I do. Yes, I do. Yeah, about public camping.
Yeah, and people kind of flipped out because before the Supreme Court ruled on it 4 days ago, at the state level, people who were against this, which tended to be mostly Democrats who didn't have a lot of power, still don't have a lot of power in the state legislature, they were pushing back on this because they deemed it cruel and unusual punishment to arrest a homeless person simply for being homeless. Now, the wording of the law says public camping. Okay? If you're homeless and you don't have a shelter, or the shelter is a nonprofit and they decide for whatever reason, maybe drugs, maybe mental illness, whatever it is, they're not going to take you, you don't have a home, where do you go? Right? You just sleep on a bench, you sleep in a park, you find this whatever shelter you can under a bridge. And now at this point, if a local authority chooses to, they can arrest you or prosecute you for that.
And this is where I want to start the conversation. I don't want to be as I honestly don't have my mind made up 100% on this. So I'm going to ask questions that I hear doing my talk show every day, questions that I have as I wrestle with this issue, and I'm going to do the very best I can to not sound like a dick when I ask these questions, because this is conversation so hard to have, because if you say anything negative or ask questions about it, you do run the risk of looking like a jackass, right? Because we would all agree we don't want anyone to be homeless, right? No one would, I mean, unless you're just a total jerk, you don't wish that upon anybody. We understand life happens to everybody. I mean, there have been times where I've had to lean into people. I mean, we've all had, things, or most of us have had things like that in our life. But here's my question to you, and it's a legitimate question. It's not like a setup for something later. When it comes to like a park, when it comes to a public space. I can remember going to Nashville years ago before Nashville became so yuppie. It used to be a lot of fun to go to, and there were homeless people everywhere. I've been to San Francisco before, homeless people, and this was 12 years ago, so I'm obviously it's been exacerbated by now. But that a couple of times I gone to Nashville 10, 15 years ago, a couple of times I gone, or the time I went to San Francisco, it stood out to me the number of homeless. You couldn't get on the trains there in San Francisco without them just being everywhere. And we got on one late at night one time, and there, it felt like a safety concern, a safety issue. I have been in Nashville around those government buildings. It felt like there was a safety issue. They would come up there to be this aggressive, panhandling, asking for money. And my question is this: all of those things, public transportation, parks, government spaces, what is the government's role here? Those things are provided. The government doesn't, well, that's not true. The federal government does, but local governments and state governments, they don't print money, right? It's taxpayer funded money. Should there not be a reasonable expectation to use those facilities for the way that they were intended? Like, we don't build a government like in Nashville, for example, right, where all the state buildings are and stuff. There used to be a lot of homeless people around those areas, and I'm sure there's not as many now as there used to be. But when you would go through there, there'd be this aggressive panhandling and stuff. I mean, I look back on that and I think this is not what we spent these tax dollars on for. And I'm not saying, okay, well, we just throw them away, you just get rid of them. I'm not saying that, but I think some pushback against this, like even in our town of Jackson, there are business owners who were saying, look, I pay taxes. Some of these people own multiple businesses and multiple properties. They're like, I pay a lot of taxes here. Like, I should have an expectation to, conduct business, that is, there's an example of a guy in our town who literally one of his tenants, he owns multiple properties. One of his tenants has to call because a homeless person sleeps on the bench in front of the salon that he rents to. And if the homeless person's there, the people coming to the salon are scared to get out and walk into the salon. So he has to leave, stop what he's doing, go to the business and ask the gentleman to leave, so the customers can go in. What all is government's job here? What's government's responsibility?
It's not to arrest them. Okay, so that first and foremost, like that's not their job, right?
I can live there.
To punish someone for being homeless, for having mental illness, whatever the case may be. I think homelessness is an issue that's easy for people like me and you to discuss, or business owners to bitch about, because it's something that we don't personally have experience with. And what I mean by that is, you and I have never been homeless. I don't want to speak for you. No one who's ever been close to me personally has been homeless, has slept on a bench, has slept under a pavilion, anything. So we don't have that.
I've lived in a car for a week with my mom when I was growing up. That was pretty wild, pretty scary. So
okay. Well, let me ask you this. How would you feel if they arrested your mom for sleeping in her car?
And that's why I'm trying to not be a dick about this. Like, these are real legitimate questions that I have, and I can't even remember where we stayed. I want to say there was like a Scotty's IGA in Bells, and I want to say we stayed in the parking lot there at night. It was something weird like that. But some business that was lit on the outside kind of deal. So yeah, I'm not trying to be heartless in this situation, but these are questions, because and I think you have to tell the other side of this, especially when it comes to smaller towns. Like, we live in a town with less than 100,000 people in it, and one of the questions that people have, and I bet a lot of communities across the country are all dealing with this, is because of higher prices. It costs more to retain the people that work for you. It costs more to buy goods for the people that do work for you to do their job. I mean, the same thing we all deal with. Governments deal with that too. We are facing in our area, like many areas, a third year in a row where we would have to dip into our rainy day budget or general funds or whatever it is you want to call it for the third year in a row, right? We're spending more than what we're projected to bring in. Can you deal with it? Is this a good time? Is this a government's responsibility to spend, I think in our case, an additional $2 million on top of 1.3, $1.4 million grant funding, which grant funding is taxpayer money too. It's just, a more collective group of people paying the taxes versus local people. But when you are faced with that, what is the responsibility of government? In those situations where you're facing a budget deficit, I mean, do you fund these shelters? Is that what government set up for?
Well, I think, and I think that's where the sort of different or personal philosophies come into play, right? And I think this is probably a striking difference between the two parties. I think people have called, shit.
Having a little technical difficulties, it appears. Gabe will be right back with us. But my question was this, and so I'll ask it as we're waiting on Gabe to log back in. What is the government's responsibility? And it's really hard. It's really hard to ask that because no one wants to not take care of this problem. I don't want to not take care of this problem, but we have a lot of people a lot of towns who are just like our town in this situation. A lot of towns who are going through what ours is are like, look, it's the third year in a row because everything is more expensive. Our projections, what we project to make in our town, we are to bring in. We have more cost than that, and some of the cost is a homeless shelter. Is this government's responsibility? My ultimate question to Gabe is that, I mean, we have all kinds of, just in our town alone, 1, 2, 3, 4 different nonprofits set up that I can think of off the top of my head, and there may be more. 4 nonprofits just in our town, like in your town, that are set up to do things like this to help with these problems, these situations. There are also people who are benevolent and give and donate their time and donate their money. Churches. I'm going to ask Gabe about that, about churches. Like it says in the Bible to literally do these things, house people who are on home, feed people who are needy. Like all of these things exist in every community across the U.S. And I'm not saying they're not doing everything, but like, should there be a more concerted effort to get all, from people who are doing good just on their own, churches, nonprofits, all these things that actually exist? Should there be a more concerted effort to get them together to fill in the gap? I'm not saying it's not the government's responsibility. We don't care if you freeze to death at night. I'm not saying that, but I guess my overall question in this is going to be, should there be a world that we live in where maybe the government becomes like the wrangler of all these different nonprofits that are in town? Government becomes the let's work with churches. Let's work with people who volunteer, who work in this space. Let's work with nonprofits to get them together to fill in these gaps. And then maybe the government plugs the last 2 or 3 holes versus government taking it on itself.
Well, I mean, and I don't know what you said while I got kicked off.
I did a lot of talking, waiting on for you to come back.
Well, but that's exactly what. Not to make this local again, but that's exactly what this shelter is. We're not footing the entire bill for this. It's nonprofit.
Okay, so explain to people who don't know. There is a grant, which again, it's taxpayers. It's a HUD grant for $1.3 million. and then it's going to be about $2 million of local taxpayers' contribution. It's going to get to about $3.3 million. So more than half local people are paying for. And then even the grant money, that's still some of our money, right? It's more diluted because there's other tax money that comes in. It's a federal grant, but it's still taxpayer money. The idea of government at any level in this problem, I guess that becomes my question.
Well, all right. So here's where I stand on it, and I'll take it from two angles. Me personally, because I've even had liberal friends of mine I've seen on social media like, well, would you want a homeless shelter on your street? Look, I don't give a shit. That's just me being honest. I don't care. I don't care if it's down the street from me. I don't care if it's next door to me. I honestly do not care at all. I think.
But you know you're an anomaly there, right?
I mean, maybe, yeah.
I mean, come on. But you've got to know you are. I mean, most people, and I believe you when you say it. I don't believe most people when they say it. I would not. Personally, I would not. And that sucks because, not for a long time. And I say it a week, and I thought back about it after I said it. It may have been closer to 3 or 4 days until we had a room. So maybe not a whole week. I don't want to make this about me, but yes, I understand what that is like. And I was a kid, so I didn't, couldn't comprehend all of it. But I understand, how scary those situations are. But I still wouldn't want one down the road from me. There's safety concerns. You talked about mental health. There's mental health concerns. There's all of these different concerns that come with it. And I want to take care of everyone in the world, but I want to take care of my family the most.
Well, here's what this sounds like to me.
Okay.
Because I don't know anyone ever who has been attacked by a homeless person, right? Now, we say these things. So this is the potential for danger, the potential for this, the potential for that. It's the same thing I hear about immigration, right? There's these narratives around that all these dangerous people are coming into the country and they're all going to do this or going to do that.
We've had people killed in this country by migrants.
Yeah, we've had a lot more people killed by law-abiding citizens, like legal citizens. Okay, a ton, right?
So I mean, the point still made. Somewhere in the nation, a homeless person has killed someone. We have to allow ourselves to believe that.
Yeah, we have, but we don't talk about the general population the same way we talk about homeless people and immigrants. For some reason, we think homeless people and immigrants pose much more of a danger to people than the general population. That's just not true. It's not. But the reason it's easy for us to do that is because we're not personally connected to homeless people or immigrants for the most part.
Right.
We can sit back and we can say, yeah, here are these narratives and let's pump these narratives out there. But the reality is the general population of American citizens who are here legally commit far more crimes than homeless people do.
But there are far more people who are here legally. I mean, those numbers are skewed.
You have a better chance of being accosted by a legal citizen who is not homeless than you do a homeless person or an immigrant.
Well, of course, but there's thousands.
We don't talk about that the same way as we talk about homelessness or immigrants. We don't talk about them the same way.
Yes. Okay. Now that's okay. All right. So let me say this. Do we think? All right. We heard reports today. Just the encampments, the tent cities, the whatever it is you want to call it, just here in our town. A lady from Tennessee.
We don't have tents. Hold on. Time out. Where do we have tent cities in Jackson?
That's what people commonly refer to these things as, just so everybody would know what I'm talking about, right? But they do have, camps set up all through. I mean, there's 50 people that live behind Casey Jones. Maybe it's even 100. I think it's 50 people, they say, that live in tents, like literally tents behind Casey Jones, right here by the country club, by my house. At the other end of the country club, there are homeless encampments. The country club had to start locking the bathrooms because homeless people kept using them and tearing them up during the night on the golf course, right? So, I mean, these things happen. We have these problems in our city, and most people, cities of 50,000 plus, have issues like this across the United States. And when they did this when they went and talked to these people that are set up at these different camps throughout our town, 60% of the people they interviewed had some sort of mental illness. I mean, that is a thing. That is a higher number than if you were to walk around Kroger, right?
Yeah, but we're having two different conversations. Like, I'm not talking about mental illness. I'm talking about being accosted.
You have a greater chance, but you have a greater chance because there's so many more people who are legal citizens than there are people who are migrants or people who are homeless.
But we don't talk
You have a
about that.
chance.
But we don't talk about that. We automatically assign these ideas to immigrants and homeless people, and it's almost like that's the standard for them, that they're dangerous. That's our starting point with them. It's almost like the conversation you and I had 3 weeks ago about custody. The starting point for fathers should be right in the middle. It should be, but it's not in Tennessee. The
I think
starting
more
point,
than dangerous. I hear.
I'm not done talking. But
Okay.
the starting point for our conversations about homeless people and immigrants isn't right in the middle. We don't talk about them like we talk about the general population. We don't. But they're humans like the general population. But for some reason we assign caution and danger to them right out of the gate. We have assumptions about them right out of the gate. And it's not fair. And it affects and it impacts the way that we view them as humans. And then we want to make excuses about what's our responsibility for them, what's the government's responsibility for them, because they're dangerous. And then we got business owners saying, well, how's this going to affect my business? And or the fucking country club, they're damaging bathrooms. Okay.
These business
Country
owners
club's
are
gonna be
keeping
okay.
the towns going. These business owners are keeping the towns going. That's number one. All right, and this sounds like another dick thing, and I was afraid that I would sound like a dick during this podcast. I don't want to.
You kind of sound like a dick.
Homeless people aren't paying taxes, brother. I mean, all these amenities and services, they're being paid by people who pay taxes, by people like
Well,
me.
hold on. Homeless people, if they buy something, they're paying taxes. If they are buying something, they are paying taxes.
They're not paying property taxes.
They're not paying property tax, they're paying sales tax.
Thousands. Yes, they are paying sales tax, but unless they go get food at phenomenal programs we have, like we have a RIFA in our town, there's food banks set up everywhere. Obviously, that wouldn't be a tax situation. What I was going to say is what I hear more so than the danger thing. Okay, and maybe the mental illness would lead to danger, but most or a lot of the homeless people suffer in our town. I would imagine in most towns from some sort of mental illness and drug abuse. I hear those two things much more frequently than I hear danger. As someone who does a talk show in West Tennessee, I hear those things associated with it, and I think both things are true. Someone who actually went out and talked to them, they said 60%, suffered from some sort of mental illness of the people they talked to, and they said 18%, which I think we could fairly assume this number was higher, admitted to having some sort of drug abuse or alcohol abuse problem. And I've said that if I found myself to be homeless, I could see trying to escape that reality myself. I could totally. I'm not judging here, but like those are the things. Like I don't think we think danger like murder, kill, but like those are dangerous scenarios.
Mental health is a dangerous scenario?
Someone suffering from mental health and drug abuse and alcohol abuse that could lend itself to creating a dangerous scenario.
How much of the general population do you think suffers from drug or alcohol abuse? I would probably say around 18%. That seems about right.
Those are people, the 18%, those are people who said, yeah, we have a problem. I'm going to guess there are a handful of other people who said we don't have a problem, who may actually have a problem.
Maybe. I don't know. That 18% doesn't sound that far off from the general population to me. And we were at the same meeting when these stats were rattled off. And to clarify, out of that 60%, she said it could range anywhere from depression to schizophrenia, right? So mental health, there's a large umbrella there.
Correct.
And if you're homeless, you're going to be fucking depressed.
I would imagine. And that's why I thought that number would be 100%. Like that would be very fair to say. If you're homeless, that would be 100%.
But back to what you were saying about, so here's where I am personally, and this is probably where we differ. As a taxpayer, like you, I am totally fine with my tax dollars going to help people who are incredibly vulnerable, who don't have enough money to have shelter. I am fine with my tax dollars going to build a shelter for them. I am okay driving on roads that may not be perfect for a year if that money gets deferred to building this shelter, right? Because driving on roads that are smooth is a fucking privilege, right? This isn't a third world country. It's not. We're not driving down dirt roads. Hell, our roads are much better than Nashville's roads are right now. Yeah. This narrative that our roads are shit has been conflated by groups of people. Our roads aren't perfect, but I can promise you I am fine with my tax dollars being deferred for a year to build a homeless shelter for me to get my wheels aligned maybe every 6 months. I'm okay with that, right? Because those two things don't equal. Those don't add up to me. Those aren't the same things.
And I don't know that I don't agree with you on that, right? When it comes to roads, and of course we're making this a very local topic, and it's a bigger, broader topic because there's infrastructure failing all over the United States. We have a huge storm drainage issue in this town. Estimates of $100 million worth of repair. That's a whole lot of money. That's going to be a lot to unpack in the next, however many years, before we deal with that. So lots of communities have infrastructure issues, and so yes, if there are surpluses. If there are surpluses, I have no problem with it. Or if it's just a small deficit, but you made mention of the roads. Our town's facing a $3.1 million deficit with $0 in the budget, in our city's budget, being allocated to roads on that $3 million deficit. Zero.
Well, so when we say deficits, budgets are passed with deficits all the time.
These are the juggles that communities are having to make.
Yeah, but budgets are passed with deficits all the time. That's not uncommon at all.
But that's not a good thing. But that's not a good thing. I understand it's not uncommon. I'm telling you, that should be alarming, the fact that it's not uncommon.
Well, I don't think it's fair to say a deficit. We have the money to use. It's a savings account. That's why people have savings accounts. It's to use it if you need it. We also don't know what tax revenue is going to look like over the course of 365 days. Budgets are passed all the time and they're not met all the time, meaning they don't spend as much money as they allocate for certain things. On the flip side of that, deficit budgets are passed. When I was in Haywood County Schools, we passed a deficit budget both years, and guess what? We didn't end the year owing money. We ended the year even or actually ahead. Mm-hmm. Passing a deficit budget doesn't mean you're losing money.
No, because
it just means you're operating on money that you may or may not have at the end of it.
Yes, of course, and everyone knows that, but it has to matter for something. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. You just say, okay, here we go. Let's see what happens. It has to matter for something, and going over is good, which normally happens. Like when we went to the council meeting, it normally happens where we underestimate what our performance is, and I think that's a smart way to do a budget. Right, that's a smart way. But then there's sometimes that we don't do it. These are still conversations, though, that have to be had. And I don't know what's wrong with my idea of all of these institutions exist all throughout the United States, from nonprofits to churches to people who just volunteer and give money. These things exist, and they are in this space right now, in this homeless space. Why can't the government say, look, we are going to be the conduit to bring these places, to bring all of these people together? Here's the idea. Churches, which I ask a question all the time, how come the churches aren't doing more? I know the churches are doing something. How come they're not doing more? It says it in your book to do these things, but they probably don't know. Preachers don't know how to apply for a grant. That makes total sense. They don't know how to apply for a grant. Well, city government, local government, there's people there who probably know how to apply for grants and help and assistance. So why can't government's job? Would it not make more sense for government's job to be a conduit for these other things that are out there?
Well, I don't know about a conduit, and I don't want to continue to make this local, but it's the only example we have right now. The city's paying to build it, but a nonprofit's going to operate it and then keep up the operating costs. So it's exactly what you're saying, other than they're just paying to build it.
Your grant money, state grant money, federal grant money, and then they do fundraising and stuff. It's still taxpayer money. It may not be local taxpayer money.
No. You just said fundraising. Fundraising isn't taxpayer money. Fundraising is private donors donating.
Federal and state money is. And that's what I said. That's year by year. That's not guaranteed. That's what was said specifically by the lady from Tennessee Housing Solutions.
She also said that if those grants stopped today, she said, my job would get a lot harder, meaning the city's not paying for it. She's got to raise funds from private donors.
Right. And that part is phenomenal, but there's still taxpayer money going toward this, federal dollars, state dollars going towards this. And I don't know that I have a problem with that as much as, is this the best use? Would it not make more sense? All right, let me ask you a question. When it comes to nonprofits in this space, do you think that we have a lot of duplication of same services?
No, I don't. I mean, because we don't have enough right now as it is. So duplication. We've got. I don't know. It depends on what services are you talking about. RIFA provides food. They don't
Yes.
always provide shelter. Churches provide shelter. They don't always provide food. Area relief ministries provide shelter sometimes, closed sometimes. Like they're all doing different things because we don't have like a space for men here, which is what the city's trying to build. So they're doing a lot of different things. It's like it's like a patchwork quilt of people trying to fill in the gaps because nobody has enough to do everything. So no, I don't think it's duplication of services.
Would it? All right. So here's the thing that concerned me. All right. So I guess we are going to talk a lot of local stuff here. Here's the thing that concerned me with the meeting today. And I thought the lady did a very good job. I think Lauren Kirk did a very good job in her presentation. This isn't shots at any of them. This facility that's being built for $1.3 million in local money. Okay. And then I'm sorry, $1.3 million in a HUD grant. Okay. So federal government money, still some of our taxes, but not a lot of it. But everybody's taxes, and then 2.2-ish million or 2 point whatever million, 2 million of city money. They will help people get to a pathways or wherever if there is a mental illness there, and they've already said 60% of the people they talked to said, hey, we've got a mental illness. I would have bet there may be a handful of more and that 60% who just don't even know that they have a mental illness, right? So that number could be higher, but already said 60% of them have it. We're making a $2 million investment at the time that we're in a budget deficit. We're making a $2 million investment into this, albeit just one time, into this, and this offers services that help people become housed again. And I think that's important, and I think that's a good thing. But would it not make more sense, again, going back to my conduit idea, for local government to say, look, we have some resources and some ideas here. We need to get under an umbrella with churches who want to help, with nonprofits who want to help. It seems like we're not being the most effective. It seems like we're throwing darts at this problem. And I know it's a big problem, right? You got to eat an elephant one bite at a time, but it seems like we're doing a whole lot of different things. Would it not make more sense to have one big organization that provided more wraparound services?
Do you have an issue with Social Security?
Do I have an issue with Social Security? Yes, for sure. We have had politicians forever. You pay 6.2% of every single dollar you make. 6 cents, 6.2 cents of every dollar you make goes towards your Social Security. It should be impossible. There should never be a time where you shouldn't be able to draw your Social Security out. Yet it's threatened all the time. Every election, they want to end SSI. You want to up the age, whatever it is. It changes. It shouldn't, because people in government rob it all the
All right,
time.
let me back up. Do you
Okay.
have a problem with your tax dollars going to support people who are too old to work, but they're still alive?
They paid for that during Social Security. They paid the 6.2 cents of every dollar that they made towards Social Security. That's their money. That's not my tax dollars. Now, if for some reason there were shortfalls, if there was it's their money. It's their money that they are getting back. It literally is their money they're getting back. Now, if there were shortfalls for housing of seniors or medicines or anything like that to help, no, of course I wouldn't have problems with that. But that's their money. Don't act like seniors are just piggybacking off this. They paid into that too.
All right, well, let me back up then. Do you have a problem with your tax dollars going to house seniors who can afford private nursing home care?
Do I have
Because
a problem?
that's out there.
Yes.
Do you have a problem with that?
Through that is through Social Security, through the disability. No, I don't have a problem with that.
Well, so what's the difference in this?
With which part?
Listen, there are public institutions that are funded by tax dollars that house elderly people who can't afford private nursing homes. Your tax dollars are paying for that.
Correct.
Do you have a problem with that?
No, I don't have a problem with that, but I don't think that the two things are exactly the same. I mean, could you not say? I mean, technically, if someone, I mean, a lot of people who are homeless now, you hear this a lot too. People are choosing to be homeless, right? Okay,
No, no, not a lot. Not a lot. No, 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 no. Not a
Hold on, hold
lot
on.
of
Let me
people
finish.
are choosing.
Let me finish. You hear those things that are saying people choose to be homeless.
Where do you hear those things?
Are
Where
you
do you hear
kidding me?
that?
Mike Roby, who worked with the homeless population in this town, said, I mean, he literally listed people that he knew who said they want to be homeless. They don't want to go to the Civic Center. They don't want to go to Room at the Inn. He literally worked with them. I feel like he would be an authority on that. Now, he didn't
Yeah,
say everybody. He said some. Now,
no. You said a lot. A lot don't. A lot do not.
I didn't say a lot. I said some people say
Ooh.
that a lot of people want to choose to be homeless. And I was about to say, I don't necessarily agree with that, but there are probably some. But if we're going to use the whole government intervention, taxpayer intervention, would it not make more sense when someone gets behind on their rent or their utilities or their whatever, their mortgage that leads them to be unhoused? Why wouldn't the government jump in then?
I mean, I don't know. But I don't know. I don't know that that's always the situation either, right? I don't. And I don't know enough about it to know what circumstances um, cause people to be homeless. It's very complex. I do know Yale did a study in 2020 that a lot of things, and we're seeing this right now in our town. I think a lot of towns are seeing economic growth, progress, how property values are going up everywhere.
Yep.
Right now.
There's a lack of affordable housing.
I forgot the term, but it's essentially investment properties, which we're seeing all over the place. These huge companies, these huge investment companies are buying up property right now, and they're renting them out for a lot of money.
Okay, and this is a problem. And I'm glad we got to this because I forgot to get to it earlier. This is one of the biggest problems of this. And this goes to my question about should we just help people before they get homeless? If we're going to help everybody, wouldn't it make more sense to help them before they're living outside? BlackRock and Vanguard, which is actually the same company, two different names, same company, same CEO, Larry Fink is his name. They have said by 2035 they want to own 60% of all residences in the United States. 60%, buying up commercial property. We see it in West Tennessee. It started in Memphis. It's happening in Jackson every single day. If you've got retirement, you have state retirement, being a teacher, probably some of your portfolio is going into BlackRock and Vanguard. It is alarming. It is scary. It's completely unchecked and unfettered. It's one of the things that are, and Lauren Kirk could speak to this much better than I could. It's one of the things that are driving prices up, especially on rental property. They're buying property up. So if you sell your house for $300,000 and you put it on the open market for $300,000, and you may get an offer from a company like this or a subsidiary company for $315,000. Well, you're just going to take it right then. They're going to pay over market price so they don't have to wait. And they're doing this all across America. And what happens is they have learned the trick. If we have enough money to spend, we can own these towns, these communities, and we can set the rental price there. So my bigger point here is this. This is going to continue to be a problem. This isn't going to be all drug abuse. It's not going to be all veterans, like whatever preconceived notions we have. There are going to be people who literally just can't afford it anymore. You can't afford your rent. You're 3 months behind. You're kicked out. So I'm asking you the question, if we're going to take care of them, would it not make more sense to take care of them once they start getting behind on the rent or their mortgage or whatever the case is?
Yes, but look, you follow this stuff as closely as I do. Can you imagine trying to rezone something for Section 8 housing here when people who are in power are making money hand over fist on rental properties? Like, you've seen the pushback to build a fucking homeless shelter after somebody died, right? That was the impetus for building this. Literally, somebody died. We want to build a homeless shelter. Now business owners are like, oh, wait a second. This might hurt our bottom line a little bit. I don't know that we want this downtown. Could you imagine if the local city council started to rezone properties in Section 8 to make it affordable for people? Like, do you think that would pass ever?
No, I mean we can't pass.
No.
We don't pass stuff now. You and I sat in the same meeting where a gentleman was in there talking about adding 60 more lots, and they're 1,600 square foot houses, 3 and 2s with a garage, brick homes that are 1,600 square feet, selling for $300,000. That didn't used to be that way, right? It's hard now. The homeless shelter, here's a concern I do have in our town when you talk about it. I think it's like $418 per square foot bill price. You had to build to HUD specs. They're COVID specs. Every room has to have its own bathroom. There's no communal bathrooms, its own sink. Like, I do think if we were to look at this, I think, could we ask the question, hey, can we build this to a certain size now and add on to it later? And secondly, what would happen if we dropped this grant and reapplied for another grant where we could cut cost, where we didn't have to have so many plumbing penetrations? It's going to drive up the cost. When you have to have, through a slab where you have to run, 25 different bathroom plumbings, that's going to drive the price higher versus, okay, we've got a sink with, 7 or 8 bowl sink, and we've got multiple, more commercial space for bathrooms and things like that. That keeps the cost lower. So I would ask the question, and none of the council members surprisingly asked this today, could this be done? Could this be something where we lose this grant, right? Give the money back to HUD, still stay on the project, but apply for a different grant that didn't have the same restrictions. This came out during COVID. Every single unit has to have their own space, their own room, their own bathroom, their own, like, every single one of them. And they did that during COVID, the design, because they didn't know how long COVID was going to last, and you couldn't be congregating together. This could be done cheaper than $418 a square foot. This could be built less expensive than that.
I mean, it could be, right? But we're still talking about human beings, okay? And them dipping into the savings account that they have doesn't affect us one way or the other, you and I, unless they choose to fund it by raising taxes, which they're not going to, right? It doesn't affect us. Yes, it's taxpayer money, but I'm fine with my taxpayer money going to give someone a tiny ass room with their own sink and their own bathroom in a mini fridge. Like there's not that much difference to me as a taxpayer if the city wants to spend $3 million or $2 million. Like,
right.
Those
we want to do a new center at the park versus do this. I hear what you're saying, because we're not going to get that surplus money back. They're not going to send us refunds. I'm with you there. But what about the fact that it's 3 years in a row? It's 3 years in a row of dipping into the general fund. A fund that started at $33 million. If everything goes through, and it hasn't passed yet, but if everything goes through, it'll be down to about $21 million in the course of 3 years, about a $12 million swing.
I'm fine with that. We still have money. Look, if we were borrowing money to take on more debt, I might have an issue with it. I still probably
wouldn't. That was a proposal last week to borrow $12 million. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
That's stupid. We've got the money. This is important. This is something that is important. This isn't frivolous, right? This isn't like, hey, can we build a new drive-in movie theater? Let's spend $2 million to build a drive-in movie theater, right? Or a fucking amphitheater so we can have more bad music on Friday nights. It's not that.
Buying the Jackson Plaza for $4 million.
Well, yes. So that's different. Now,
say it if you're uncomfortable. Say it.
I was on board with that. I wrote an op-ed saying, yeah, let's do it. Now's the time. Go for it. I will argue this. If you let that stuff sit there, what are you going to do? Because, you got to do something with it because it's decrepit. It's falling apart. That whole area.
You know who was living in the Jackson Plaza?
Do what?
You know who was living in the Jackson Plaza, that abandoned building, for years and years and years? You know who was living in there?
Who's that?
Tons of homeless people. A lot of drug use in there, drug paraphernalia. It was very unfortunate. Not a safe environment.
That's why we need a shelter, and that's why we needed to purchase it. So win-win. There you go.
So you have somehow acted like you were in favor of the Jackson Plaza being purchased. And
dude, look it up. I wrote a whole article on it.
I know it's on there. You were walking it back before you had time to think on it. But when you go to deficits, now here's what I like about ideas like this: they can be money makers for the city, right? For the community, you can bring in acts, you can have tax revenue. People buy tickets to go see things. People stay at hotels. Sure. It can be sold eventually. It can be a net profit for the city, and I'm okay with that.
We get so hung up on this stuff. We are so myopic in the way that we think about these dollars that we don't see a bigger picture. Okay, so let's say we don't build this shelter. Let's say we back out and we try something else, and let's say nothing gets built. And let's say Jackson continues to grow like it is. We're going to have more homeless people, okay? They're not going to go away. So what do? Now, with the Supreme Court thing, well, you can arrest them. All right. Well, then you fill up jails. Then taxpayers are paying more money to house homeless people in their jails, right? We just built a new fucking jail because it was overcrowded. We can't afford to build another jail. We just built one. So, like, what are your options? Okay. This is simple to me. This isn't complicated. Like, we have a need for that. The need is for people who really can't do anything on their own. So we take care of those people. Now, 10 years down the road, if this thing is a mess, it's a mess. I don't see it being a mess. There's something clearly there's an issue right now. We've got too many homeless people in Jackson for a town of our size.
120 was the last census, even though for whatever reason they do these census counts in January, which seems weird, but 120, the mayor said, at the last count in the city of Jackson. Homeless.
When was the last count? 2020, I guess? That was the last census we did. So 4 years ago.
No, they do that every year. So it would have been last year. They do the homeless census every year.
Okay. So 120 last year. I mean,
And the mayor did say that he wants to kind of do that more in the spring. He felt like maybe doing it in January wouldn't make as much sense because maybe some people were staying at a church. Maybe some people were staying with family who wouldn't always stay with, just things like that. He thinks he could get a more, a number that may be more complete doing it in the spring.
Okay. I want to sort of bring this to the larger idea of the Supreme Court ruling, the last, 13 minutes of whatever this conversation is. I teach at a school where 30% of our kids would be considered homeless, right? Now, the way that homeless are classified in the public school system is something called McKinney-Vento. It doesn't technically mean they are living on the street. It means they're either in a hotel, they're living with a family member. Those students are counted as quote unquote homeless because their parents or their guardians don't pay for their own personal shelter, if that makes sense. About 30% of our student population is that at the high school where I work. I cannot imagine one of our students' parents getting arrested simply because they don't have a place to go.
But would those people be in a park or be in a government building?
Say that again.
That 30%, which is a number, and this is a different conversation, that is an alarming number because people need to know where they're going to stay long term. I totally agree there, especially kids. But that 30%, that's not indicative of people living on the street or living in camps or anything like that, right? That could mean they're living with a friend or a weekly motel, which is neither one of those are ideal situations. But I'm just saying
they're not ideal because they're not stable. So at any moment, that person could be living in a park or in a car or somewhere like that. So if that happens to happen, which it has several times with our students,
I'm sure it has,
and their parent gets arrested, then what do? So their parents in jail, they have no one to take care of them. Right. So I think that's where, and look, I'm very confident in our local police force. I know the captain. I coached his daughter in tennis when she was in middle school. He's a good man.
Do you know anything about tennis?
I learned it. We were district champs 3 years in a row.
Well, some of that was the school you worked at, but whatever.
I didn't coach at USJ. I coached at Northeast, dog.
Oh, my bad. I figured it was USJ. I was like, they come to you pretty good there from lessons. Okay. No. I should have known USJ would have hired you to coach tennis.
But he's not going to arrest people for this. Now, you get some podunk ass town and Wichita, Kansas, or wherever. We don't know what they're going to do. So I do think there should be safeguards in place in the federal government that protect people who can't do anything for themselves. We do it for other people. We don't do it for homeless people, though.
It's an interesting point. Now, the Supreme Court, what I would tell you, the conservative side of me would tell you this. The Supreme Court didn't say arrest them. The Supreme Court essentially said it is the community's decision on what to do, even enforcing it, right? Some communities could say, look, sleep here. We're not going to change the way we do things now. They're just essentially sending it back, right?
But think about what if they did that with civil rights? What if they were like, hey, we'll leave it up to the state or the community to decide what they want to do about African Americans or Hispanic people. We'll just let them decide.
Again, do we build these parks? and let's just use the park as an example. And this is the dick comment, but this is a legitimate question that I struggle with. It was not built for that, right? If you go to a park and there are homeless people there and you can't use the park because of that, is that what the park was built for tax dollars?
No, the park wasn't built for that with tax
Okay.
dollars. But how many homeless people are living? I guess it depends on where you are.
It depends on where you
Here,
are. And there are a lot in San Francisco. You and I both listened to podcasts that Jon Stewart did with the former mayor of San Francisco, and this is a different conversation. She was talking about the drug tents and stuff. An idea born from a good spot. Like in her heart, she thought it made sense. It would be safer. Now, in reality, it ended up exacerbating the problem. Making the problem even worse, and more people coming there doing it, which led to, more drug use, homelessness, all that. Not saying all homeless people are drug users, but I'm just saying, like, there it exacerbated a problem. But it was born with the best of intentions. It really was. If you're a conservative out there, you need to find Jon Stewart's interview. It's on Apple with, I forget her name now. She's the mayor of San Francisco. Unbelievable interview. Mm-hmm. Really was. You can tell this lady's like, oh, this idea came from a good spot. It just did not work out.
And I don't know, and that's the thing. Like, I'm all for people coming up with ideas coming from a good spot. I don't think prosecuting homeless people for simply existing is an idea that comes from a good spot. To me, that's not a productive idea. That in the long term, you're hung up on tax dollars. In the long run, that's going to cost more people money, more taxpayers money.
So when the panhandling law was changed in our town, in our community, when the panhandling law was changed,
two different things.
Well, agreed, right? Not everyone who panhandles is homeless, but could we say that probably a large percentage of them are?
I don't know. It depends on who you talk to, because some people will say none of the panhandlers are homeless. They're just trying to get money.
Right.
And some people will say that they're homeless.
I have seen panhandlers get into cars. I mean, we've all kind of seen the same thing. I never followed them home or anything like that. I didn't, care enough to. But the ones that are, when we stop panhandling in towns, a lot of times those people will move on. That's what happened in Chattanooga. That's what the idea is happening here. If we were to offer, because this is another fear you get doing talk radio. People call in and say, look, if we offer these services, you're going to sit there, we're just going to have more homeless people come here, right? We're never, essentially, the more services we provide, the more people will come for those services. And we will make the problem worse.
And there's nothing to back that up. There's nothing to back that up. It's a hypothetical.
Why do we have more homeless people in Jackson than we do in Crockett County, Lexington, Henderson?
We're bigger. Services
too.
Maybe.
I mean, Wife is an amazing place. They feed. I mean, it's. I would imagine you can get Jackson's right off the interstate, which I think
we also have a Greyhound bus stop in Jackson.
We have a bus stop.
That's a big thing.
I've heard. I've never ridden the bus, but I've heard people.
I ride it frequently. I'm telling you,
people that are unhoused. Are you on there with people that are unhoused? We need to talk to them. We need to talk to them and ask them. Seriously, next time you're on the bus, on the Greyhound, ask them. Like these questions, if they would want to talk to you. All fair.
You were mentioning Nashville earlier, and it's not, the homeless people aren't by the government buildings.
They used to be when I was a kid. When I was younger, they were.
The homeless people now are congregating around the Greyhound bus station on John Lewis downtown. Like it's insane how many homeless people are around there, and it's because like you get enough. Like a Greyhound bus ticket is cheap as hell. You can wrangle up $20 for a ticket and then move on to another town, or hopefully try to get somewhere where you have family close by or somebody you know where you can get housed. So a big reason that we have more homeless people in Jackson is because we have a Greyhound bus stop. Hell, we had a whole fucking station until the steakhouse took it over, right? So at some point, like you got to recognize, like we are right on the interstate. We're going to get more of those people. To sort of put a bow on this, it's a complicated issue. I have always been okay with my tax dollars going to help people who can't help themselves, or maybe not can't help themselves, don't make enough money to provide for themselves or their family. I've always been fine with that. I don't cling to my tax dollars the same way a lot of people do. It's a non-issue for
You
me.
should, because
All
your government spends like drunken sailors. I'm not talking about in this town, but I mean
all
just
the money,
government in general. They waste your tax dollars. You do need to be concerned about it.
and I mean, I'm not, because every need I have is taken care of. I'm fine, right? I'm okay with my tax dollars going to help people who aren't, regardless if they try or don't try or whatever the situation is. I'm fine with that.
You are being taxed because I know close to what you make. You pay about 50 cents of every dollar in some form of a tax. That should sicken you, right? I pay 50 cents of every dollar in some that I make in some form of a tax between, city, county, state sales tax, because we don't have income tax where we live, but we have, 9.75% sales tax, and then your federal income tax. And then when you figure, you buy a car, you sell a car, all of these different things, they track, any purchases on Venmo and Cash App over $600, you pay almost 50 cents of every dollar you make in your life goes to some form of tax. That should sicken you. Now, I would suggest that there's so much waste in there. This doesn't feel a ton like waste for the government to get involved with this problem. Like, I would imagine somebody with a brain, Vivek Ramaswamy, perhaps somebody with a brain could go through the government's budget and be like, oh, here's tons of waste here. Here's tons of waste there. Bob Nate tells us all the time, $22 billion. This is a recent study. $22 billion would end homelessness in the United States. 22 billion. That's it. Sounds like a lot because I can't write a check for 22 billion. But when you think about what we sent Ukraine, what we sent, all of these different countries that we have sent money to, and not saying we shouldn't help Ukraine. That's not what I'm telling you. But like, we do this stuff all the time. This problem has not ended and could end relatively quickly. $22 billion isn't that much money for a federal government. And if they said, hey guys, we got a 3-year plan to end homelessness, we're going to spend $7 billion a year, it becomes a lot more palatable.
It does, but what does the reality of that look like? And this is a whole different conversation, because what you're going to have to do to end homelessness is the federal government's going to have to build buildings in people's towns, and then people are going to bitch about that.
You have, and you're not going to like this, because I'm not even going to tell you which person brought this idea up, but there's a lot of land in the flyover states that's not used, could be purchased, and you could house people there in some Midwestern states. In multi-year, that was a Trump idea. I know you're going to like that because it's a Trump idea. See, if I would have just waited and let you think it was Bernie or somebody, if I'd have let you think it was Bernie, you'd have been behind it. I should have waited. I screwed that up.
I don't know that Bernie would propose an idea like that, but
in Austin, Texas, they're building smaller homes outside the city limits. They have bought abandoned hotels that were for sale and converted those over to handle the situations. I mean, different places throughout the country are doing different things.
I will make this local to close it out. I had a really good friend who lived here for a while. He lives in Kentucky now, and he is very handy with building, and he built tiny homes. And he took this idea to the city planner here in Jackson, and he wanted to build a community of tiny homes, affordable housing, very affordable housing, the east side of Highland, just on the outskirts of downtown. It would have provided starter homes for people who couldn't afford it, allowed them to build some equity in those homes, and then sell them and move on to essentially a standard size living home, right? City planner denied it. Okay.
What reason was given?
I don't know.
Zoning. Yeah, zoning. That was going to be my next guess. Zoning. I should have said it wasn't code zoning. Yes, that's going to be
zoning. Some things like that. Either way, it did not get done, and he left town. And shit, I don't blame him, because it was a hell of an idea. Now, this was not the same we did not have the same mayor at the time that we do now, right? This was the former mayor's administration. But that was an idea by a private citizen who was willing to do that and invest in that, and it was shot down.
Former mayor said, "What's my piece of this?"
Well, that's the thing. Like, I do believe there are people, like you said, who are willing to do that. But again, like, it comes down to a lot. Like, government is fucking tricky. And and people a lot of times who have more stroke, more money, more whatever, end up making the rules and making the decisions.
Government's not that tricky, I don't think. Government's pretty cut and dry. Government's pretty easy to see, I think, in my opinion, what's happening. We, the electorate, we are stupid collectively. We are dumb. We don't pay attention to what goes on every single day around us. I was guilty of that for a lot of years, especially on local stuff. We don't pay attention. And if we demanded, if we said, look, let's fix this problem, but let's fix it in ways that make sense. Like, I really wish there would be more of a I'm talking federal government here. I think when we closed down all of the mental institutions, and I know why we did, right? A lot of that started in the Reagan administration because there were a lot of abuses and stuff happening there. But why didn't we just fix them? Why didn't we fix them? Why did we close them down? Why didn't we make them better, perform better? Why do we close it down? We do the same thing now with public education. Hell, just give vouchers out. Let's screw it. Let's abdicate all of our responsibility. We can't handle it as legislators. Let's just let somebody else do it. These private businesses do it. That's crazy. That's a weak way out. But we are allowing them, as people who vote for these people, we're allowing this stuff to happen. And I saw tonight. My wife was scrolling through TikTok, and she said, "Look at this. It was a $9,900 home. You can order from Walmart. No kidding. Not a bad looking house, especially if you're a single dude. $9,900 shipped. Now you have to pay somebody to put it together. That's pretty good. Like, if we ever got serious about this idea, we could have something like that. You could build a community with health services and you have all of these different things. Again, if government was a conduit, you could have all these different things in their own neighborhood. Boy, that would make sense to me.
It would make sense, but then you got to get all levels of government on board with that. And that,
or you have to have everybody who votes get on board with that and then demand the expectation. So, they shouldn't be making the decisions for us. They should be representing what our wants are. That's the way it's supposed to work. I know it doesn't work that way, but that's the way it's supposed to.
It is. This was good. We disagreed a lot more than usual, Chuck.
I like that part of it. You acted like an ass.
Yeah, you're right. Like, I just want to take care of homeless people, but you're like, fuck them. They'll figure it out.
From that. See, that's what I didn't even want to do this one because it's impossible to not sound like a dick to ask the questions. But I do have questions. I legitimately do have questions because I think that there need to be very specific roles of government. And I do think government needs to be small. And I'm not going to give up on that, even though some of my Republican brethren have left me with big government ideas. But
I think that horse is out of the barn, and I don't think it's coming back, buddy. Sorry.
I feel like the Bill Maher of the right.
The
party has left you. Well, of course you don't. He makes way too much sense now. Of course you don't.
I didn't like Bill Maher when he was a perceived liberal and I was a liberal. So,
well, I mean, his jokes are pretty academic, so I can see you not liking him.
Oh, shut the hell up. Enjoyed it, Chuck. We'll be back next week. Deuces. Oh, damn.